Perfection is a thing that we all go after but seldom achieve. But this episode, episode 257, is all about perfection. My name is Phil, and you're listening to The Lip. Yes, this is episode 257. And if I could have possibly imagined a day that would be a perfect day to make the perfect show, which is what I'm doing today, this is that day. To let you know, I'm recording this show fairly in advance. It's not going to be out until April 18th of this year, but I'm recording it 9 days earlier, April 9th. And as a 49ers fan, you could understand why I believe that April 9th is a perfect day. 4-9. Just kind of makes sense. At least it does to me and most of the faithful out there. Go Niners. But let's put it this way. I'm going to talk about things that are perfect today, or things that seem perfect. Truly something that nobody can possibly attain, but there are situations that can be executed perfectly. And many of these things that I'm going to talk about are around things that have been executed perfectly and things that are perfect in their nature. So essentially, talking about perfection is exactly why we're doing it. And why did I choose episode 257 to talk about perfect things? Well, some of you may already know, some of you don't. But by the end of the episode, you'll understand why I have an affinity for 257 and why I think that it is a perfect number. Although I will be getting into a little bit of math, talking about some perfect numbers. Totally separate entities, believe it or not. Unfortunately, 257 isn't a mathematically perfect number, but it is a number that is synonymous with perfection in ways that you may not know, but by the end of this episode, you absolutely will understand. So, I believe that I'm going to go ring the bell and begin the main event right now. Episode 257, The Perfect Show. Where do we begin? If most of the things that I'm going to talk about are perfect, I guess, considering the time of year right now, I'm going to adjust and readjust how I was going to do the show, because I was going to start it a little different way, talking about 257. But I think that's a better way to close the main event than it is to start it, because truthfully, that number means quite a bit to me personally. I love that number for a reason that I'm going to tell you soon. But I'm going to tell you that these things that I'm going to talk about are all perfect. For example, something as simple as if you were to go bowling and you hit every single pin for all 10 frames, you would have a 300. That 300 would be a perfect game in bowling. Speaking of perfect games, baseball season has started, and we're really in its infancy for the 2026 season, and there hasn't been a perfect game yet, and in all likelihood there probably won't be a perfect game. How do you describe a perfect game? There's one player specifically who is credited for the perfect game, and that's the pitcher. How does he get there? Very simple, but very, very, very difficult to accomplish. The simplicity of what a perfect game is happens to be the fact that there are 9 innings in a regulation baseball game, and there are 3 outs that must be attained in each baseball game. In order for the pitcher to have a perfect game, he needs to not allow a single hit or a run in the game. So he needs to essentially have 27 batters up and 27 batters out. Go through the lineup 3 times with nobody getting on base. That's the best way to do it. Of course, there are some skewed perfections where people would say, well, the guy walked, but he didn't hit. But to me, that doesn't really count because the guy got on base, and you still have to face a 28th batter. Not perfect, even if you get a double play. Sorry. But talking about perfect games, the best thing about perfect games is the drama that happens in the process of a pitcher getting to a perfect game. Usually, nobody thinks or bats an eye at the fact that a pitcher is playing really, really well, getting strikeout here, strikeout there, fly out here, pop out there, ground out here. Nobody really pays attention to it until around the 4th inning. Then people start silently speaking about it. Hey, that pitcher hasn't given up a hit yet. And people start to get closer to the edge of their seats because you got about half a game left. And this guy is really pitching really good. He's got really good stuff, as they would say. He's putting the ball in places that the batters just can't find it. And if they are finding it, they're not getting a very good piece of the ball when it comes off the bat. And they're able to ground out or pop out in the outfield or infield. And it just makes the game of baseball super intense as you get later and later and later in a game when the pitcher hasn't given up a hit. It becomes more and more and more and more intense as time goes on. As I have learned in my early mid 20s when I really started to appreciate baseball because of one of my favorite movies, Basic, where I discovered that baseball is really a game of anticipation, which means you're waiting for something to happen. But in a perfect game, what you're waiting for essentially is nothing to happen. You want the pitcher to strike out the batter. You want the pitcher to pop up the batter. Something has to happen that renders the offense null and void. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for nothing to happen for the offense. And as the innings start to pile up, inning number 5 and 6, it becomes even more crazy. Don't let it get to 7. Whew. 7th inning, people are starting to hold their breath because they can't believe what's going on. 8th inning, oh my goodness, my goodness, my goodness. I somewhat think that subliminally that the other team at this point, not that anybody would ever say that they're doing it, but just a little bit, is kind of hoping that they don't hit. I think so. Just because it's so rare to get a perfect game and to be a part of a perfect game. Even if you're on the losing side, it's still impressive to see. And I think that when you get to around that 8th inning, it's really, really intense. And then what's even more crazy is you get to the 9th inning, no batters have hit, no runs are scored on the offense, and there's only 3 outs left. Everybody's biting their nails. And I think, again, on both sides, even the losing team who's getting shut out and haven't been on base, some part of each player on those teams has to be thinking, well, this is getting pretty cool. I mean, it really is. And to say the least, when you get to that 9th inning and 2 outs, the most intense moment in, I would assume, perhaps all of professional sports would be that. I can't imagine that there's anything more intense than that. I love football, but I can't imagine the immense pressure of a back and forth game, and you're within three, worse yet, you're within 4 points of a win, so you have to have a touchdown, and it's your final drive. And we'll even say it's the Super Bowl. You must score a touchdown. That intensity has got to be crazy. But realistically, there's plenty of. I hate to put it like that, but there's been plenty of games in the Super Bowl where teams were down to the wire and they had to drive and win the game. It's intense and it's fun to watch and it's crazy, but it's happened a lot of times. There's been 60 Super Bowls easily. There have been a bunch of them that have had some tight scores. Granted, there were some like the 49ers demolition job of the Denver Broncos that one year when they beat them 55-10. That was certainly not a nail biter, but the 49ers against the Chiefs when they played their Super Bowl in 2023, it went to overtime. Overtime. And it was like seconds left in overtime, and the Chiefs won that game. Ugh, I'm still broken up by that. Bet you couldn't tell. But that no hitter, the pitcher is up to bat, the pitcher is ready to throw, the catcher is giving his signs, and now it's time for the pitch to be thrown. For that second or in change, when that ball is leaving the pitcher's hand and approaching the batter, the entire building and anyone who's watching it on TV just doesn't want to blink. And then it happens. The scenario that just makes everybody lose their mind. Either the ball gets past the batter while he's looking and leaves the bat on his shoulder thinking that the pitch was a ball, or the batter swings, misses, game over, or the batter connects with the ball and it goes up and it's popped up, and then the intense pressure goes to the person who the ball is in the direction of. If this person catches the ball, that pitcher will go down in history. But if that if that player misses the ball, they're gonna have tremendous egg on their face, and everybody's watching. The pressure of that moment is just so much, and then it happens. Out number 3. 27 up, 27 down. Perfect game. It's just mind blowing when it does in fact take place. And it is super, super, super rare. I mean, it is just really, really crazy. And I've got a couple statistics here about perfect games. I'm going to double check the one because I'm pretty sure I got it right, because that's why you write notes. You write notes to make sure that you got it right. But here, I'm going to double check my work, but I'm pretty sure that I have it down. Yeah, I did it. Okay, we're good. That crazy scenario in all of Major League history has happened 24 times. Now think about how insane that is. 24 times there's been a perfect game. That's it in Major League history. 24 times. That's all. 24 times a perfect game. Just 24. Can you imagine that? Only 24 times? And to make that 24 times having perfect games seem even that much more intense and that much more precious, here are some things that make that even just blow your mind even further. Consider the fact that there have only been 24 perfect games. No player has done it twice. So there's 24 perfect games, 24 different pitchers. Nobody was so great and had such fortune to get perfection twice in a career. So, not on the major league level. If you get it once, you did something. Don't even anticipate doing it again. Certainly, people will say, "Oh, you can't think of it like that." Yeah, but you see, that's one of those situations where everything has to go just right. Like I said before, it's one thing for the pitcher to strike out that last batter, but if there's contact, now you got to rely on your outfield, your infield. Is that shortstop going to stop that ball from getting into the gap? Is that center fielder going to not have the sun in his eyes or the big lights in his eyes and he's going to be able to catch the ball? Is the first baseman going to be able to make the play when it's thrown to him by the shortstop? These are all things that have to go right in order for that perfect game to happen. And boy, there's just so many possibilities for that to go wrong. But 24 times in Major League history, it went right. Now, the very first time it happened was in 1880. 1880 was the first perfect game. And it was, we're getting close to the anniversary. It was June 12th, 1880. The first ever perfect game. A gentleman by the name of Lee Richards threw that perfect game for the Worcester Redlegs. Yep. Lee Richards for the Worcester Redlegs threw a perfect game for the very first time on June 12th, 1880. That's quite a long time ago. Quite a long time ago. And to make matters that much more interesting, the last perfect game was the Yankees were involved. Of course they were, because they're the Yankees. Domingo German ended up throwing that perfect game, and that was, believe it or not, also in June. It was June 28th, 2023, the last perfect game. June 28th, 2023, which was 3 seasons ago. The likelihood that we're going to see another perfect game anytime soon, well, you never know. But I would not bet against the fact that somebody's going to do it, but I wouldn't necessarily say they're going to do it this year. But you never know. You can never tell. Especially because the conditions have to be just right and the situations have to be just right. And if they are, well, hey, that'll happen. Now, amongst the teams who have done the perfect games, I already told you that nobody's done it twice. But there is a team that has the most perfect games in Major League history, and of course that is the very same team that has the most World Series in Major League history, the New York Yankees. They have 4 perfect games on their resume. 4 of them. So, by default, you could almost say that the Yankees are the perfect team. Sorry, Philly fans. Not sorry, Boston Red Sox fans. But more interestingly than that scenario that I was talking to you about with the Super Bowl, trying to go and win the game with only seconds left, down by a little bit, in that super pressure packed situation. Well, in the game of anticipation, baseball, there happens to have been one game in the World Series in 1956 where Don Larson pitched and won a perfect game in the World Series. The only perfect game ever pitched in a World Series. That's pretty intense. That is pretty intense. About 70 years roughly from the first ever perfect game, and in the other direction, about 70 years since the last one is when that perfect game happened, give or take. Roughly speaking. Roughly speaking. I think that's really interesting, though. Perfection doesn't just happen in baseball. Of course, there is perfect things that happen in basketball, but we're not talking about a team winning every single game. That's football. It's only happened one time. Came real close with the New England Patriots a few years ago, but they failed. Thanks to Eli Manning, he beat the Patriots in one game. And I guarantee you, Tom Brady and Bill Belichick and everybody else on that team would have rather lost 3 regular season games than to have lost the one game that they did lose. Because, of course, it was the Super Bowl. If you could have picked one of those games to get a loss, I think like week 11, that wouldn't be so bad. I mean, week 16 wouldn't hurt too much. But the Super Bowl, yeah, they dropped the Super Bowl. No perfection for them. And there was a specific trend that happens every single year for the one team that was perfect. What they do is they drink champagne together when the last team that was perfect in the season finally loses. Unfortunately, that team, the players and the coaches of that team, a lot of them have passed on because it's been a long time. This is the 72 Dolphins who went undefeated and won the Super Bowl 17-0. No losses, whole season, went from regular season to the playoffs and then won the Super Bowl. It's a perfect season. Only happened once in real life. Of course, in Madden, I do it all the time. But real, actual human beings playing the human game of chess, only once. Just once. Will it happen again? My personal feeling is it will never happen again. And I believe the NFL set the stage so that it can't happen again. First and foremost, you have to understand the Dolphins, when they won that season, I believe there was a 14 game regular season. I want to say it was 14 games. If it wasn't 14, it was 12. It was one of those two, but I'm thinking it was 14 regular season games. It was 14. And then they played the playoffs. So, to make a long story short, when you only have 14 games, not to make light of it, but 14 games is easier to win. And then 17, when you get to the playoffs, trust me, the beating that those players took to survive even one game in that NFL meant a lot. And the fact that they were able to win and go undefeated, it's crazy. Right now, there's a lot of different rules, but there are more games. It wasn't long after their perfection that the NFL went to a 16 game season. Added 2 more games, made it that much harder. And the Patriots, they couldn't get past, like I said, they didn't go undefeated. They went 16-0. They won all the regular season games. They were one win away, and then they won a playoff game. So they won 17 games in a row. They did get to that point, but that wasn't the end of the season, so it doesn't count. Sorry. And now there are 17 regular season games. 17. And it's hard to win 10 games in the NFL. How much harder is it to win 12 games? How much harder is it to win 14 games? 15. There aren't many teams in the NFL who've won 15-1 when there were 16 game seasons. And even now that there are 17 game seasons, 15-2 is not easy to do. It's really not. So to pull off 17 regular season wins, which would definitely give you a one seed in your respective conference, you then still have to play the divisional round, the championship round, and the Super Bowl. You're saying you've got to win 20 games in order to do it. The odds are very, very far from you doing that. And with the league talking about making an 18th game for the regular season, that, in my opinion, like personally, I think that 17, when they had 17 games, that pretty much locked up the fact that there wasn't going to be another undefeated team in the NFL. But then you have an 18 game possibility for the regular season. There's no chance that a team is going to stay A, healthy enough, B, motivated enough in order to be able to win that many games. And of course, the other X factor is C, the coach willing to risk their players getting injured. More games, more chances of getting hurt. You win 12 games, I'm not going to try to kill myself to win 15 unless it's going to make the playoff positioning a little better. You're going to get a home game. But if you're locked in a playoff spot in week, if they do that 19 game, it would be week 19 if they have an 18 game season. Maybe even week 20 because they might give the teams two byes because of how many games they're playing. It's just to keep players healthy for that long. And then it makes it even more important when you're in the playoffs because you've got to stay healthy in order to get through. 49ers this past season, they just were so unhealthy that it's amazing they got past the Eagles, but there was no way they could beat Seattle because even in the Eagle game they lost some of their players. There was just no way. Health is such a big issue when it comes to the league, and in my opinion, it's the number one component that's going to help a team go undefeated. And nobody's going to be healthy, completely healthy. Which of course they always say everybody plays hurt, but the likelihood that you're not going to have a major injury in that kind of season, it's really hard. That's why I honestly believe that the 72 Dolphins will probably go down in history forever as the only undefeated NFL team. Since we're talking about football, we'll go to the college game a little bit. And it turns out that this year, the Indiana Hoosiers, who are super good, their quarterback is going to most likely go to the to the Las Vegas Raiders as the first pick in the NFL draft this year. Those guys had perfect. They went undefeated. They won all their games, and most people, at first glance, would say Indiana is that good. Well, yeah, they were. Indiana's program was building up over the last 3 years, and they got really, really good to the point where they were at their peak efficiency this year, to the point where they ended up undefeated, winning the college football championship by running through everybody in the playoffs. And I don't see a scenario, even though I love the University of Texas, that even if they had made the playoffs, I don't see them having beaten Indiana this year. Even though that they said there was a couple teams that may not have necessarily deserved to be in the playoffs, but they got eaten up. And my thing is this: even if a team like, say, Texas or Notre Dame made the college football playoffs instead of some of those other teams, I'm going to give them their flowers. I'm not going to mention them too much. But the Notre Dame and the Texas team that didn't make the playoffs, I don't think that it would have mattered. I honestly think that either one of those two would have eventually had to come across Indiana, and Indiana would have beaten them. Flat out, in my opinion, they would have beaten them. And I'm thinking it wouldn't have been one of those crazy college games, 56 to nothing or 70 to nothing. But I think that Indiana is a good 2 touchdowns better than my guys in Texas, and at least that many against Notre Dame. So I don't think that there's any way that anybody would have beaten Indiana this year. It just wouldn't happen. Indiana did what they were going to do. They pulled off an undefeated season. And their undefeated season is one of a total of 64 undefeated college football seasons. Can't go wrong with that. Now, granted, football is a rough sport and there's not as many games. So if you have a short amount of games and you can stay relatively healthy during that short amount of games, it's not easy because, of course, college football plays less games than they do in the NFL. So there's a little more of a cushion for them to be able to escape without any major injuries that could derail their entire season. And 64 times they were able to do it. It's really, really impressive. Now, going into basketball, like I was about to say, in the NBA with 84 games, nobody's going to win all 84 games unless you're playing NBA 2K. Well, yeah, I did it twice. And in NBA Live, those series, I won a lot of those games where I was undefeated. 82 and 0, 84 and 0, getting proud of games. But I didn't lose a single basketball game. And my personal favorite thing was I came within one shot of a shutout in a basketball game. Whew, that was fun. Final score was something like 123-2. And I was so mad that that team was able to get a single layup. But it was what it was. But in reality, college football, or college basketball, super, super intense, just like college football. But they play about 30 some odd games, which is about a little less than half of what you get in the NBA. And in college basketball, there have only been 7 teams to go undefeated and win the championship all the way through that crazy big dance tournament. 7 teams. That's it. 7. And one of those teams, which is the reason why it's so impressive that the winner of the national championship in football was Indiana, because Indiana is really, for the longest time, known as a basketball school. They are one of those 7 teams that went undefeated. They did it in 75, 76, 1975, 1976. They were 32 and 0 and won the national championship. Great season for them. Really, really was. Now, on the women's side of college basketball, there have been more undefeated teams than there have been in the men's side. There have been 10 undefeated college basketball seasons in the women's side. But which makes it even that much more impressive, the perfection of one school has 60% of those undefeated seasons. 60%. University of Connecticut, otherwise known as UConn, won 6 seasons, not in a row, but undefeated national champions as the women's side. 6 times they did it. 6! It's crazy. There's only been 10 total, and they have 6 of those seasons. That's insane. You're talking about incredible coaching, incredible players. Those women's teams of UConn, those Lady Huskies, were incredible. They still are. They really, really still are. Almost won another one this year. Wouldn't have been undefeated, but they almost won another title. They're crazy good. Really, they are. Now, I know that some of you are probably a little bored about the sports talk and perfection, but it seems like it's a real easy way to attain perfection. Not easy, it's really difficult, but you'd see perfection more so in sports than in other spots. And as a result of that, I've got to tell you that I got one more sports thing for you before I go on to the other stuff that I found to be perfect. My favorite team in the National Hockey League is the New Jersey Devils. They were absolutely awesome, and a recent version of the team, unfortunately not this year because they're not making the playoffs, did have a Stanley Cup opportunity but couldn't get past the Kings a few years ago. It hurts. It really does. Because the man I'm about to mention changed the way that people in New Jersey think about hockey. My goodness. When Martin Brodeur put on that number 30 and went on the ice for the Devils, he changed everything. It's one thing that Scott Stevens was a great defenseman, but it's something altogether when you have the man between the pipes who is not going to let anything past him. Man stood on his head 3 times to win the Stanley Cup. And you got to admit, there were plenty of scorers who got some goals. Like Claude Lemieux ended up winning a Conn Smythe, which is the MVP of the playoffs. Um, Scott Gomez and Elias did really good stuff at one point in time. Scott Stevens, the captain of the team for a long time during that early run in the from 95, 94 to like the 2000 era when they were really just eating up all their Stanley Cup wins, the 3 of them that they got. But of course, I always call Martin Brodeur the greatest goalie of all time because he is. He has the most wins of all time. And more importantly, he has a statistic that makes him perfect. What is that? His favorite pizza is plain pizza. It is. But that's not the thing that makes him perfect. The thing that makes Martin Brodeur perfect is he has the record for the most shutouts of all time with 125. And then, even more interestingly enough, he has the record for most minutes. The record for most minutes consecutively shutting out opponents. The guy has 332 minutes of shutout hockey consecutively at one point. 332 minutes of consecutive hockey. Now consider the fact that an NHL game has 20-minute periods. Martin Brodeur literally shut 5 teams out. 5 teams. Shut them out. Not one goal went past him for 5 games. And a half a game. So a whole 20-minute period, the first period would go by, and somebody scored a goal on him in the second period. So nearly 6 games without giving up a goal. Like, what? And we're talking about the days when the NHL had scores like 2 to 3. And like it was not as easy to score goals because they changed it was just like the NFL. They wanted to make it so that more people would be able to see offense as opposed to defense. I've always been a defensive minded person. I love defense. You give me a football game in the NFL that's 10 to 7. I'll love it because during that time you're going to see people getting tackled, offensive coordinators throwing their headsets, defensive players doing sack dances. All that stuff's going to happen. The same thing I feel about hockey and baseball and everything else. I love the fact that nobody can put a single point past Brodeur. It makes it almost to the point where the game becomes super intense because you're asking yourself, will he get that shutout? Will they score any goals? Will it? But Brodeur, the greatest goalie of all time, he wouldn't let it happen. 125 times. 125 shutouts. Perfect games for a goalie. Like, nobody's gotten that many. And because I am a Devils fan, I truly believe that his record will stand every bit as long as Gretzky's total points scored will stand. Just saying. That's enough for the sports for a little while, anyway. Gonna talk about some other things. How about this? Many kids in college take the SAT test, well, before they go to college, and it helps them get themselves placed for the school that they want to go to. The better score, there you get. Now, I personally never did take the SAT. I never did. And part of the reason was I was looking at going a junior college route, and I really didn't need to take the SAT because I wasn't thinking about a four-year university yet. I wanted to go to junior before I went to anything bigger if I was going to go, which I never did. And I watched a lot of my friends just pretty much lose their mind, stress themselves out over taking that test. And when they finally took it, no matter what score they had, they didn't feel it was good enough. They were okay with it because they did better than what they wanted to do, but they always thought because they did so much study and they put so much prep work in that they would have gotten better than what they got. I mean, everybody feels like that. You go, you study for a test real hard, and you get a 90 when you thought, you know what, I thought I knew every answer. I should get them all right. It's what happens sometimes. Now, with the SAT, the best possible grade that anybody can get is a 1600. Now, 1600 is perfection. That would mean you got every single question right. Every single question right. Now, there are likely a lot of questions on this test. There really are. And for somebody to get every single one of those questions right would be just absolutely insanity. Can anybody do it? Is it even possible? Some of you people who have taken the SATs can't possibly imagine that anybody could ever get all the questions right. Guess what? It happens. Just like bowling, just like a perfect game, there are people who have in fact gotten 1600. And it's a lot more than you might think. From my research, I discovered that out of 10,000 people who take that test, about 7 will actually be able to get a 1600. That's crazy odds. 10,000 people take it, and 7 could potentially get a 1600. That's really, that's a lot more people than you think about. Now you're saying 10,000 people, that's a lot of people. You put that many people in a basketball stadium, and you're going to say that you could just pretty much shoot a t-shirt cannon and give 7 shirts away, and those 7 people are the people who actually got a 1600 on the SATs? Yes. And why does it seem like that's not a very lot of people? But I'm telling you that it's a lot of people. Because think about it. There's about 350 million people in this country. That's a lot more than 10,000. Now, you're saying that every 10,000, you're going to get 7 roughly? That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. That really is. When I found that out, I thought, this is crazy. It's absolutely wild. That out of 10,000, 7 will get 7, around an average of 7. And I'm saying again, 7 will have a 1600 on the SATs. How is that even possible? Well, my personal opinion is it's got a lot to do with the intelligence of the kids who are taking the test, the outcome. I mean, and of course, there's always that little bit of chance because Out of that 7 people who get a 1600, I'm gonna just throw this out there. This is my personal thought process. Those people, that 7 out of 10,000 who got the 1600, you can't tell me that there was one question that those people were looking at and said to themselves, I'm not really sure what the answer is. And they guessed. And their guess was right. How about that? Should have looked up that odds. But of course, nobody who got a perfect score in the SAT is going to tell you that. If they're truthful and they're honest, I'll guarantee out of that roughly 7 average out of 10,000 people who got a perfect 1600 on the SATs, I bet you 2 of those 7 probably had a question that they were really unsure of, and they just sort of closed their eyes and just pointed at the answer, and it happened to be right. At least in my mind, I'd like to think that. But who knows? These people could be literal machines and actually just spit out the exact answer. But I like to think that there was some guesswork involved with that 1600, just a little bit. Next, we're going to continue with numbers because numbers seem to be a way to go. There are things called perfect numbers. Of course, I'm going to circle back to 257 again. That is not a perfect number. I think it should be a perfect number. In my opinion, it kind of is a perfect number. For me, it's a perfect number. But it's not a mathematical perfect number. This is what a perfect number is. A number, how is it defined? Perfect number is the sum of all its proper divisors can equal the number. All the numbers that can divide into another number, if you use each individual number, it will make that number. For example, a perfect number is 28. 28 is a perfect number. If you write this down, and you're gonna need to write it down in order to really see what I'm talking about. I had to write it down twice, and there's some of these numbers here that are so huge that I wasn't gonna even come close to writing it. There's some very basic perfect numbers, like 6 is a perfect number. 496 is a perfect number. 8,128 is also a perfect number. Now, for the purposes of being able for you to sort of see it in its perfect form, all the divisors of the number 28 are as followed. Leave 28 out, but these are the numbers that divide into 28. 1, 2, 4, 7, 14. 1 times 28 is 28. 2 times 14 is 28. And 4 times 7 is 28. Got it? You follow me? Now, in order for this to be a perfect number, all the numbers except for 28, you leave 28 to the side, all the other numbers, if you add them up, will equal 28. And it does. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 plus 4 is 7. 7 plus 7 is 14. And 14 plus 14 is 28. Perfect number. Like I said, the same applies for 6. The divisors are 1, 2, and 3. 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 plus 3 is 6. 6 is a perfect number. I'm not going to get into 496 or 8,128 because we'll be here all day. But That's a perfect number. Now, speaking of perfect numbers, I am talking about what I believe is the most perfect number there is, 257. That's the most perfect number there is. Why do I find that to be such a perfect number? And why am I making such a big deal out of episode 257 being the perfect show? Well, it all goes back to one of my favorite things, professional wrestling. For some reason, everything sort of circles back to that. That's why they have the Intercontinental belt sitting on that side. And that is specific. This design of the Intercontinental belt is my favorite design. It may actually be one of my favorite belts. My favorite title has always been the Intercontinental title. And specifically, this version. Because the man who held it at one time, who held it twice, one of the matches he had was probably what I would consider one of my favorite matches, and arguably can be up there on the list of matches that would be one of the best of all time. And I personally believe that it is my second favorite match, and possibly I think it could be one of the second best matches of all time. My personal Mount Rushmore of matches has that match with that title on it. In fact, two of my favorite matches of all time are for the Intercontinental title. And the man who is in the second match that I think is that great is the reason why 257 means so much. That guy was probably my favorite wrestler. And in truth, when I came to doing this show, I was really hoping to have my shirt. But turns out my daughter took it. And she's got that shirt somewhere in the universe. Who knows where it is. But it's got my favorite wrestler on. That man is Curt Hennig. And what does that mean? Curt Hennig. For those of you who don't know, Curt Hennig was Mr. Perfect. Dun, 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 dun. Of course, I can't actually play the music. They wouldn't let me, I imagine. So we're not even going to try. But Mr. Perfect, Curt Hennig, would be introduced all the time weighing 257 pounds. 257 pounds. Thus, 257, perfect weight. The weight of Mr. Perfect. Perfect number. When I originally started this show, I released it on Saturdays, like I still do, but I released it at 2:57 p.m. every day. Sort of an homage to my favorite wrestler, Mr. Perfect. And, of course, the match that I thought was so great, he actually lost. But he lost to Bret the Hitman Hart for the Intercontinental title. And that match holds up to this day. If I were, say, a young guy who was going to try to become a professional wrestler, that is one of the matches that I would go to study in order to learn how to be a wrestler, in order to learn how to do all those little things wrestlers do. Sell, which makes you think you're hurt. A believable finish. The way that match ended was, well, perfect. I'm not going to go into it too deeply, but let's just say Mr. Perfect got countered in such a way that the Hitman was able to put him in his finisher and submit Mr. Perfect. And in real life, during that match, prior to it rather, Mr. Perfect had suffered a major back injury if you go and watch SummerSlam, I believe it was 91. Yeah, SummerSlam 91. Mr. Perfect had a major back injury when he was wrestling Bret the Hitman Hart. If you watch that match, knowing that he was hurt, it makes that match even better. The fact that he did what he did with that kind of an injury. Just insane. Truly insane. Unfortunately, Mr. Perfect passed away in 2003 in February, which is kind of weird because when I ended up getting sarcoidosis and the symptoms started to really affect me, I don't know if there was some correlation. I don't know. But it was in February, roughly around the time that Mr. Perfect had passed, was when I started to get sick. It's weird. Really weird. But that's the importance of 257 to me. And that's why this show has to be about perfection. And that's why I had to make sure that he was part of it. Had to. And of course, another thing that I have to add before I shut down the show is the fact that, well, hey, cereal box collector. I'm in my office right here in the museum, and I didn't dig it out. I should have. But I always assign a number to the position of where I got my cereal boxes. So I know that my Jordan Gray is the first one. The Krusty the Clown is box number 1000. But, of course, for this day, which is perfect, 257, I have a Kellogg's Hot Wheels, like the cars, Hot Wheels cars, cereal box, which is my 257th cereal box that I collected in my vast cereal box pile. It's a Kellogg's Hot Wheels cereal box. And that is box number 257. And on that note, I'm going to ring the bell and going to shut down the main event. That was a lot of fun talking about 257 on this perfect day. But now it's time to go to the spear of the week. And the only spear of the week that I could think of for this episode that would make a lot of sense to me is somebody who halted perfection. Just drove me nuts when I think about 1990. Granted, the Hitman beat Mr. Perfect in 1991, but Curt Hennig's first ever televised loss in WWE as Mr. Perfect was in 1990. It was at WrestleMania in 1990. WrestleMania 6. I will never forget it because I was always rooting for him to win all the time. I don't know why, but I just like the bad guys. $1 Million Man, him, Ravishing Rick Rude, the big guys like King Kong Bundy, the One Man Gang. But Mr. Perfect was always my favorite. And as a result, WrestleMania 6 was a sad WrestleMania for me because the televised defeat of Curt Hennig for the first time ever, Mr. Perfect lost to the person who I'm going to give the Spear of the Week to, Brutus the Barber Beefcake. I'm still mad about that. And I honestly think since Mr. Perfect was such a good sport, that's why he was able to become Intercontinental Champion after Ultimate Warrior had to give it up after he won the world title. But I was always bothered by the fact that Mr. Perfect lost to Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Then, of course, he did lose another match to Kerry Von Erich, the Texas Tornado, in SummerSlam 90. But realistically, I would have been a lot happier had Kerry Von Erich been the first person to beat Mr. Perfect. Because, again, the way that they made Perfect lose to Beefcake was logical. You weren't going to out wrestle Brutus, Mr. Perfect. You weren't going to make him submit necessarily, except for the Hitman, who was a technical and sophisticated wrestler who was able to match him hold for hold. So that made sense. That the Hitman just actually was a little bit better of a technical wrestler, and that's why Perfect lost to him by submission. But Brutus the Barber Beefcake literally had to slingshot him into the post where he knocked himself out. And Mr. Perfect was pinned. 1, 2, 3. Because he got knocked out. Same thing kind of happened to him against the Texas Tornado. And it made sense because, hey, you got to knock Mr. Perfect out. You're not going to out wrestle him. So those are the two guys who beat him in that way. But the first ever was Brutus the Barber Beefcake. And he is the Spear of the Week. Alright, now it's time to do the game of 3 things that have one thing in common. And I picked this one specifically because I'm a really big fan of one of the people on the card. Now, the 3 things that I have to look at here and determine which thing that these 3 have in common. I was thinking about it this entire show because after I picked it, I looked at it and I'm not really sure. I know one thing about it, but I don't know if I'm going to be right on with it. The 3 things are the NHL team, the Hartford Whalers, became the Carolina Hurricanes. The NFL's Houston Oilers became the Tennessee Oilers, who then, of course, became the Tennessee Titans. And Mario Lemieux, who is probably my favorite hockey player of all time, retires. The one thing I know for sure about these 3 things is that they happened in the same year. That's unquestioned. There's no doubt that they happened in the same year. And I have a vague recollection of what year that is. I have a real good idea. And I know that I'm going to be within 3 years. But the gist of it is, for sure, that all 3 of these things happened in the same year. Mario Lemieux retired. The Hurricanes left Hartford and became, or the Whalers left Hartford and became the Hurricanes, and the Oilers moved to Tennessee prior to becoming the Titans. I know that that's part of it, but the exact thing is what year. Now, I have a pretty good idea. Like I said, I think I narrowed it down to 3 years. And I feel that if I was going to make a guess as to what year it was, I want to say my official guess is going to be 1996. That's the guess. My official guess is 1996. But if I'm wrong, I'm sure that it's either 97 or 98. It's within those 3 years. But I'm going to go with 96 as the year that I'm pretty sure that it is. And that's my guess. And I'm going to stick with 96. But if I'm wrong, like I said, I'm thinking it's going to be 97 or 98. It could be either of those two. But I'm really thinking that it's 96. This answer is really weird. This answer is very, very weird because I can honestly say that I was so weirdly close, but usually the answer to these questions is one specific thing. And as a result of one specific thing, I would have assumed that it was going to be one specific thing. I don't understand how this question works. The Hartford Whalers became the Carolina Hurricanes. The Houston Oilers became the Tennessee Oilers, and Mario Lemieux retires. I thought that they'll happen in the same year. Now the answer to the question is really weird because it has the number one and it says events of '96, and number two events of '97, number three events of '98. And 97 is in bold. So I'm going to say that 97 is the correct answer, but I knew that it was one of those 3 years. And for some reason, all these other questions only have one answer on them, but this one happens to have three. But like I said, 97 is the bold one. So I knew that all three of these things happened in the same year. I'm certain of it. And of course, as I'm looking at the question, it's bold. The question is in purple. It's deeper than the other ones, so it's like a special question. And I guess the answer is 97. That all three of these things happen. Now, now I'm so messed up. I'm gonna have to try to check this out real quick. Um, let's see. I need to know. Did Mario Lemieux retire the same year as the Oilers moved to Tennessee and the Whalers moved to Carolina? Hmm. Hmm. Doing a quick read here. And okay, they were in Tennessee at that point. Hmm. When did the Hartford Whalers move to Carolina? Okay. Yeah, the dark lettering was correct. That's what made the difference. That's what was. So there was a multiple choice question, and 97 was the correct answer. All right, so that's what it was. So I was right on. I kind of knew that it was within those 3 years, and it definitely was 97 that all three of those things happened. The Titans, well, the Oilers went to Nashville. The Whalers left Hartford and went to Carolina to become the Hurricanes, and Mario Lemieux retired. I knew it was one of those 3 years, and it was in fact 97. That's interesting. That question was just weird the way it was set up. That's what made that kind of messed me up a little bit. Now, I had a question that I wanted to do, but all things considered, I'm gonna do a different question. If I can find it, there it is. I'm gonna go and take question 257. Why wouldn't I? The question is, what age would I not want to live past? It's a weird question to ask somebody, right? What age would you not want to live past? And that question is very similar to the one with an answer that I answered last week. And that one is, it depends. Is there an age that you don't want to live past? I don't know. I can't imagine that that's a question that, on its value, is something that you would want to answer. I mean, does anybody in a hurry to die? I don't know that I really am. I can't say that, well, hey, you know what? I think 48 is a good run. That's enough. I'm going to be 48 this year. No. There's plenty more to do. Would I say, well, if I get to the ripe old age of 100, I think I'll call it quits? What if I'm still 100%? My mind is still sharp. I'm enjoying the great grandkids. Why would I want to check out? That's a question that would certainly be weird. I mean, granted, nobody wants to end up in an iron lung or a ventilator and just sort of being a vegetable. At that point, well, everybody's pretty much would say that they're ready to check out. If they can't function in society, that would be it. I mean, it, realistically, it wouldn't matter if you were 1 or 100 at that point. If you were in a state where you wouldn't be able to have a reasonable level of health, and um, your cognitive functions weren't right, or your body was broken down to a point where it's constantly a problem. I mean, it would depend. Man, if I was in the current state of what I'm in right now, the health situation that I'm in right now, with the back pain, the bicep repair, the ankles, the concussions, the knees, the shoulders, the hip, all that, the neck arthritis, and I could still drag myself to a pizza place, let's fight another day. That's all I can say about that one. Uh, let's fight another day. That was question 257 out of all these things. And it's a weird question. There's always weird questions in this book. Every once in a while that come up. But like I said, it would depend on physical mentality, health, and all these things. So we're gonna do even one more because that question was just a little weird. Mm. And I'm gonna ask answer another one because I think that this is another good one. As I looked at it, I opened it right up. Mm, that one, but I'll eventually answer it. Here it is. What memory from your school days still troubles you? That's another question, and I've got a couple of answers for that. Two memories that pop in my mind from my school days that trouble me just a little bit. Things that could have gone a little differently, and the question only wants one. So, to get one out of those two things, the one that kind of troubles me would have to be it's got to be this one. I'm going to write it down first, and then I'm going to go ahead and tell. It would be real simple. My senior year of high school, track season was winding down to the point where it was two more meets in my high school track career. That was it. Just going to be two more. There was going to be no more Phil Henderson at Southern Regional High School after these two meets. My track career for high school was going to be over. I had gotten sixth place in the Ocean County Championship, which I was happy with because that's what I wanted. I wanted to place. When I was intense the year before and said I wanted to place, I never specifically said I wanted to win. I wanted to get second. I just said I wanted to place. And so I ended up doing just that. I got sixth, which was the last spot on the podium. But it's still on the podium. But the thing that still troubles me is I threw that 46 feet 8 inches, and I did that. Now, the next week, that was the county tournament, the Ocean County Championship, which was at my high school. Now, the next week and the week after were two bigger tournaments. Now, the Ocean County Championship was just that. It was just the teams that were in Ocean County. The next week was what was called the Shore Conference, which was a much larger tournament, which had two counties involved. Not just Ocean County, but it also included Monmouth County, which was considered the Shore Conference because a lot of the Monmouth County schools were also very close to the ocean as well. I mean, and they also were a part of it. So Ocean and Monmouth combined for one tournament. At the time, it was um, held every other year at my high school, and the other year it was held at Monmouth. And in my senior year, it was going to be at Monmouth. In my junior year, it was at Southern. Um, so really, the Ocean County Championship was the last tournament that I actually, or last meet in general that I performed at home. Now, the week of practice for the short conference, because I was the only guy on the team, not just captain, but the only thrower who was capable of maybe contending for some sort of place in the short conference and even the tournament the next week, which was the state sectional, if I had a good enough throw. But there was nobody else on the team, as far as the throwers went, who were at that point where they were close to where I was. I was the best chance that we had at the time. And so, my cousin Dr. Dan, now he's Dr. Dan, and Coach Beverly, the shot put, discus, javelin throwing coach for Southern, were out there with me. Were with me when I was practicing to get myself ready for the shore conference. Now, 46 would have been enough to get me into the seated heat, but the shore conference usually had about 3 to 5 guys who might have been throwing in the 50s, but not often, because that year there was only two, and a kid who did in fact win threw 56. And during that practice, I was throwing in the mid 40s, 45 to 46, about where I was usually at. And then, for the first time in 4 years, Coach Beverly said something to me that he had never said, and it was just him and my cousin. And I guess he felt that, hey, I've been doing this for all this time, 4 years, and I only got a couple more times to do this. And he said the magic words: "It's just your cousin and me. Nobody else is here. Just let one go." And I grabbed the shot, put it up on the side of my neck. Nobody there except for those two who had been there forever. My cousin, he's like a brother to me. And my coach, who was literally the guy who showed me what I was doing. And I had the goal that I wanted to break the school record in shot put. At the time, in my senior year, the record was 54 feet 1 inch. And I had only thrown 46, and I was off by a bunch. But this day, I got myself together, and I took those words that the coach had told me, and I threw one that was really far. Now, to give you an idea, normally our throwing area had lines to define the distances, and it was usually 5 foot intervals. And for the Ocean County Championship, normally our line started, because it was high school, some kids just weren't that good. The line started at 30 feet, and they went 5 intervals out. But for the Ocean County Championship, they started the lines at 35 feet. I don't know why they took 5 feet off, but they started at 35 feet. That's what they did. And so the lines were still out there like that. So the lines were there. And it was 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, and then there was a 60-foot line. When I released that shot put, it went in between the last two lines. Now remember what I said. The school record was 54 feet 1 inch. And the lines on the shot put area were 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, and 60. So the last two lines were 55 and 60. I threw it in between the 55 and the 60. Meaning, if I could have taken that throw a week earlier, I would have won the Ocean County Championship. If I had taken that throw with me to the Shore Conference, I would have won the Shore Conference. And ultimately, I would have left high school with my school record and my secret desire to want to be in the Hall of Fame of Southern Regional would have been cemented by at least 2 feet. And I would be a Hall of Famer now. But it was not to be. That's how that played out. You win some and you lose some. In that short conference, for some reason, I didn't even throw 45. I think I threw like 45. No, I did throw 45. I threw 45 and some change. I didn't even throw 46. But that one throw at one time, that was a school record. And as of that point, I believe it's been broken since. But when I threw that throw, there was nobody at Southern Regional who threw one that far. Since the 70s, when the guy had originally made that record of 54-2. 54-1 rather. My mind was all about 54-2. But that day, for the first time in 20 some years, a Southern Regional athlete threw one that was farther. But like I said, since then, they've come up with better teams and better people, and they've thrown farther than that anyway. So good for them. But now, it's time to put this perfection to an end. You can always check me out on Instagram at Philip Henderson 5102. As always, there's always room for one more on the LIP Facebook group. Join us. Join us. There's always room for one more. And specifically, I'm looking for 3 more on the Facebook group. If we get 3 more, we'll be at 100. Let's see if we can get there. That's really it. I have some simple words of wisdom, and the only words that I can think of for a perfect show would be these 2 things. Nobody beats Mr. Perfect. Nobody. And nobody's perfect except for Kurt Hennig. On that note, my name is Phil, and you've just listened to The Lip.